This is the Senya plus 8 free units to clear Epic Hell. Of course, since we're using literally the bare minimum available, there's definitely a lot of upgrades that could be made unit-wise. For an add-in, a lot of people might not have her. Midnight Gaul Lilius, Bologna, or Zahak are solid replacements here. Something like Camilla you could replace with Afternoon Soak Flan for much more consistency. And then Tamarin is kind of just here for fun, though she seemed to work out okay. But I do have a Senya, Isaria, Acades set up in my previous one. So you could check that out too if this isn't working too well for you because of the high RNG in this phase. Let's take a look at the stats. So first up for the first phase, Senya is pretty much the core. If you're looking at it with the unit limitations, I tried Falconer clearing, it wasn't looking too good. But Senya, you just need 85 effectiveness and 200 FRES. I guess I'm 1 effectiveness off, I didn't notice. If you have Bastion, you can use that for much better time getting the stats necessary. You can see here I have HP mains and an FRES main here, which ideally you would have double attack main, but it is kind of hard to gear, so it's fine if you can't do that. And then her EE, I didn't bother getting one, but if you were to get one, you would want the healing one, so that she can heal a bit when she S1s. And then, of course, you do want her effect chance maxed on her S3 and on her S1. So then next up, we have Vivian. Vivian, you probably want her S2 max just for the damage. And then her EE, you want her to be on the cleanse one. And I opted to use Daydream Joker here because this was the phase that was lacking the most in damage for me. And then for stats, you just want her to be about 220 speed is fine. You could go lower if your add-in is slower. It's just, as long as she's moving before add-in, you're good to go. Crit chance, you do want 100, but since I'm using add-in, and add-in gives 7% crit chance to all units, I dropped a little bit. And then the rest of the stats are just into damage. And then there's add-in. So I only have add-in at 187, so Vivian could be at like 200 and it would be fine. But you want add-in to be a little bit slower, because this way, if she moves after the boss, her Death Break will last the full 2 turns instead of the boss pretty much instantly moving right after her and removing a turn. But for her stats, you just give her 85 effectiveness, at least 93 crit chance, and then attack and crit damage with about 185 speed or lower. And then for artifact, I only have 2 Daydream Jokers in this account, so I'm just using this one instead for a 20% damage boost. So that's for phase 1. Like I mentioned, the upgrades would be something like Midnight Gaul Lilius, Midnight Gaul Lilius, Bologna, or Zahak would be fine upgrades. And then we can look at phase 2. Phase 2, I was using these guys. So let's look at Mercedes first. Mercedes, you want her pretty slow with immunity set. Immunity set lets you just ignore the attack down from the ads completely, and also the stigma and the pushback and everything, so you can just load up on damage. You actually don't need this much damage. I have her on Symbol, but if you're struggling to kill the ads, something like Portrait would work fine if you happen to have this. Otherwise, just use Symbol. I think I, like on my other run, I had Portrait and I managed to kill the ads with only like 4200 attack. So you probably don't need this much damage, but with your, since you can pretty much minimize your speed, you can get away with loading up a lot of damage. And then aside from that, Destruction is going to be the best 4-piece set. So that is Mercedes, and she's pretty much integral. I guess one alternative is Bloodblade Karin. She also does have a Soulburn option. The only thing with Bloodblade Karin is that you can't run her with immunity set because the boss will get angry when you have immunity, attack buff, and immortality. So you do have to run Bloodblade Karin a little bit faster. And then there's Mascot Hazel. So we also have her with immunity set to prevent the pushback so she doesn't get pushed behind Mercedes. With the Rod of Amaryllis for the healing. And all that really matters for her is the speed. The rest is kind of whatever. The one thing about Mascot Hazel is that depending on how you did her skill tree, she has a rune here on her S3, a 20% chance to grant continuous healing for 2 turns. This is kind of bad because the boss will use S3 again if you hit him while having 3 buffs, and for Mercedes, that's attack buff, immunity, and continuous healing if this procs. So if this procs, you're just going to have to reset, and if you don't have this rune, then you won't have an issue. And the last unit we used was Camilla. Camilla, I just have her with random damage gear and then 85 effectiveness and super slow because you want her to go after Mercedes. And for her artifact, I just gave her a random damage one, which you honestly could just give her Warhorn or something to give your Mercedes more stats. That's probably more important. And for the replacements, Afternoon Soak Flan would be a good replacement because her S3, you can soul burn to ignore F-res. So if you can afford the souls, then this would up your consistency a lot. Something like you just soul burn this and then Mercedes S1 and you would clear the phase. And now let us look at phase 3. So for phase 3, we've got Senya. I turned off her imprint to reduce her stats a little bit. But I have her on Rage Pen just because this would give me the most damage. Because the setup I'm using for Tamarin dual attack as well. Like I mentioned earlier, there's the other setup I have with Akadi, Caesarea, and Senya, where I'm running like a 180 speed Senya instead on Destruction Pen. So you could check that out if your Rage Gear is not that hot. For EE, we're going to Barrier EE because we're doing one S3 and then a dual attack S1 to kill the boss, so we don't really need the extra attack one, and the boss punishes extra attacks anyways. So the Barrier helps keep us alive a little bit. And Daydream Joker as our artifact because it's the most damage. You could try to do Destruction Pen if your Destruction gear is much better for your nuclear gear. I also don't have the gear on this account to get 100% crit chance, which is why my Tamarin is running this little volleyball artifact. 5% crit chance to all allies. Something like Warhorn would definitely be a lot better. One thing is that the boss spams pushbacks with his S1, and there can be RNG, so I think you actually don't want Tome, because worst case scenario, your Tamarin goes before your Senya does, even after you idle form in S2. So that would be kind of bad, because you want to dual attack after Senya uses her S2, S3. But for her stats, it doesn't really matter. It's just enough speed to take the turn right after Senya and not get cut by the boss, ideally. Which is why I removed her sword, because I couldn't figure out how to slow her down without doing weird stuff. And then the last unit, Senya. If you have Song of Stars, definitely use it. It's not mandatory. You could kill just with Death Break and Unbuffable from her S3. As long as you land 2 of the 3 debuffs, it's probably fine. So Song of Stars just increases the consistency a lot more. And then for her stats, you just want her to go first before Tamarin, so you can give her Idle. It's the usual thing. You just S2 and then S3 into Tamarin. You could opt to tune her stats a little bit more and drop some bulk for damage, but it's not too important since Senya is doing pretty much all of the damage. And now we can take a look at a run. So the first RNG point in the fight is that because we do not have the gear to make Senya our highest attack, this means that the Decaying Curse will not get instantly cleansed off. This means that when we Senya S3, we can't actually blind the boss, which is kind of important, because these ads only cleanse 1 debuff, so normally it's fine if you only provoke 1, as long as blind landed on the boss and on the ad. Because when they cleanse, they'll just remove the blind and the other one will still be provoked. But because we can't land the blind on the boss, and we need Death Break for damage, you do have to reset if you don't land both provokes. But we landed them fine, so there's no need to reset. And now we have to land this Death Break as well. So since we landed that, the fight's pretty much fine now. You can just dump your hits into the boss with Vivian and added. There goes the mana buff. There is the option to Soulburn Vivian's S2, but you shouldn't be short on damage. One more hit from Vivian and we'll be in the next phase. So now we give Mercedes greater attack buff. And the main RNG point here is whether or not we could land Camilla's Death Break. So we landed it, and now we're pretty much free to move into the next phase. S2, and we are good to go. It gets a little bit dicey if you don't land that death break. You definitely can clear. Regardless, it's just close. Now we pray for some debuffs. I'm pretty sure you need at least 2 debuffs in order to kill this cleanly. Which we missed the unbuffable, but we got the target. So we can S2 for Gator attack buff and Soul Burn our S3. Which isn't a completely clean kill, but we can just dual attack with Cameron. And even if the boss punishes dual attacks, there's not much for him to punish if he's dead. And that is it for the Senya plus 8 free units epic hell clear. Like I mentioned, this is pretty much the bare minimum unit-wise, so there's definitely some upgrades available, especially with units that a lot of people might have, like Flan or Blona or Galilius, stuff like that. And I will take a look at trying to clear phase 1 without using Senya. It's definitely going to be a lot harder because you only have 3 units in here and a lot of things need to cover. But I'll take a look at it anyways, and it's probably not going to be with free units though. I'm going to be using some actual 5 stars here.